Good morning all and welcome to a long overdue stroll around another broader Peterborough village. Today we're going to be taking on Easton on the hill near Stamford, just off the A1, full of history, some of which I know about, some of which I don't. I'll tell you a little bit more about Easton as we head inwards towards the village. We're still about a mile out at the moment, and the reason I'm a mile out is I'm walking along Racecourse Road. And there's a clue there as to why we're walking along this road. There used to be a racecourse here, Stamford Racecourse, and yeah, what can I tell you about Stamford Racecourse? Well, it goes back a bit to the 1600s, early 1600s, and I think it finished in the early 1800s, but it was no point-to-point course. It was no sort of second-rate country racecourse. This was a major racecourse, big crowds, huge crowds. Lots of nobility, lots of big prestigious races. There was an oval course here, a straight course. That was a serious race course, long since gone, but you can't really do Easton on the hill without mentioning Stamford Racecourse. It's right on the outskirts of the village, and we'll see what we can find that is still left of it. And I warn you now, there's not a lot, but we'll talk about that in a moment. I'm going to put a map up. It's the only map I can find that shows the layout of the course. You can see it's an oval with a straight that was added later on. You'll see in the corner a little red circle around it, the grandstand next to the finishing line, and that's the survivor. I hope, well, I know it's here. It's a private residence now. We can't get round the front of it, but I do have a photograph, but I will also try and grab what I can of the back of the old grandstand, and that'll be our starting point. So that's what I'm now looking for, in the hedgerow, through the hedgerow that is. The first race meet here was in March 1619, and the last one was in July 1873, so it's 250 odd years of its existence. It's a shame it's no longer here. And I think, if I remember rightly, the grandstand was added in the late 1700s, so it hasn't been here throughout the whole period of the racecourse, but it was such a successful course they kept expanding it, adding the straight section, adding the grandstand, pulling in the crowds. Right, I suspect where these dustbins are is the entrance to what used to be the grandstand. I said we won't see too much, unfortunately. We're the wrong side of it because the course was on the other side of the grandstand from what we're going to see, but just to show it still exists. There it is, hidden in the trees. That is the back of the racecourse grandstand. As you can see on the gate in the foreground, it says the grandstand, and I'd love to just roam through there into the back and get a view of the other side, because it's quite spectacular. And that's where the racecourse would have come, right in front, right on the other side of the building. Thundering hooves would have been coming past that building and cheering crowds. See if we can get a view further down the road. I'll put up a photograph now of what the other side looks like, where it looks more like a grandstand, as you can see. In the distance there in the woods is more or less where the oval part of the racecourse would have been. I'd love to get in there. If I was brave enough, I'd just trundle across, but it is private, so I'm not going to head over there. I'd love to have a look through those woods, because I can't believe there isn't something still surviving in there of some sort, but most of the oval part of the course was in those trees, and the straight, which was added, I think it was a 1 mile straight from start to finish, would have been in the foreground, with the start being, well, you can't see it, but it's behind that tree. I have no idea whether it was flat, steeplechase, hurdles, whatever. I presume the straight was flat. But yeah, they would have been thundering along between here and the woodland. Unfortunately I can't get a better view of the surviving grandstand, which is a shame. Right, as we trek down towards the village, the sort of my hope is that I can get somewhere close to where the start of the straight on the racecourse was, so that I can look back along it. It's about as good as we're going to get really in terms of remains. I'm told the actual course of the straight is still very noticeable if you can get to the start line, so I'm going to have a go at that. As we walk towards the village, I mean, what can I tell you about? I mean, in terms of primitive history, there isn't a whole lot been documented. It was in the Domesday Book. It was known as Easton, E-S-T-O-N-E, back in the Domesday Book. Prior to that, nobody really knows. I'm sure there were settlements here prior to the Domesday Book. Easton itself sits on a piece of high ground, relative high ground, as opposed to on the top of a mountain. And on one side the waters flow down into the Nene, on the other side the waters flow down into the Welland, so it's the sort of dividing point, which is probably why there is a settlement here, because there are waterways, plenty of waterways around the village, and it would have made a perfect place for more primitive Brits, if you like, to have settled. That's the theory anyway. Oh, I loved this place as a kid. Yeah, I'd have had fun here as a kid. Give me a few sticks, I'd be bringing these down, along with half the traffic on the road probably. Forgot to mention at the outset, thank you. I think it's thank you is probably the right word. I suppose when I'm exhausted at the end of this one I might think differently, but Andrew, Ian and Angela, all of whom said, you got to do Easton on the Hill, lots of history, do Easton on the Hill. So it's their fault that I'm here, but no, thanks for the suggestion. I need suggestions, I need some ideas as to what might be good to have a roam around, and I'm quite looking forward to this one, so thank you to you three. Okay, well I found the start. This would have been the start of the 1 mile straight. Nothing to see, but you can see the straight track in front of us, and that would be where, as I say, the 1 mile straight section of Stamford Racecourse would have ran. Would have gone all the way down into the distance to where we saw the grandstand, which would have been the finishing line. So that's about all that's left of Stamford Racecourse. Right, we're coming towards the end of Racecourse Road now. We're going to be turning on to, rather than diving into the village, I'm going to turn left for those that know the area and head out along Stamford Road for a distance. There's a few things down there worth seeing, or I hope they're worth seeing. I think the first building we come to is, when I drove past it last week, it looked very much like a school building, so I'm pretty sure it's an old school. Which brings me on to one of the issues with planning this walk, which is there's a lot of documented history from like 1600s and 1700s, but there's a big gap in terms of 1900s history. Usually when I do these walks you can find quite a lot of detail from the late 1900s that tell you that buildings were bakers, butchers, undertakers, candlestick makers, blacksmiths, which makes them quite interesting. And there isn't anything for Easton, so even with schools, I know they're schools, they look so much like schools, they've got to be schools, or were schools should I say, but I can't tell you much about them. So if you're a resident of Easton on the Hill, or a former resident of Easton on the Hill, and you're looking at some of these buildings that we'll see today, and you know that used to be the bakers, or that used to be the ironmongers, or whatever, please add your comments under the video, because I certainly would be very interested to know a little bit more of the modern history of some of the buildings of Easton. Otherwise it's going to be a bit skeletal, unfortunately, but still interesting, great buildings, so still plenty to see. There's also a lot of old buildings in Easton that look like they've been around a bit. I'm not sure about this one, but I think it has. Yeah, this has been around a bit, that are just not listed, and if they're not listed buildings there's no detail really anywhere that I can pick up on, but yeah, that's got some age to it. Well, this is the school building, no doubt about it. That is a school building. I can't tell you anything about it. Yeah, I wish I knew more. The wall on the left here by this sign, I am pretty sure is the old village pound. It's marked on an old map. It looks like it could be a surviving wall from the village pound. Could be wrong. Need some local knowledge on that one. Kind of makes sense because there's no buildings here. There's no real reason to have a wall there even. We're pretty much on the right spot, so that would have been the village pound, probably mid 1800s, where they held any stray animals until the owners turned up. Apologies for the traffic noise, unavoidable. If you know Easton on the Hill, you'll know the Exeter Arms pub coming up on the left where these cars are. Unfortunately, it's no longer the Exeter Arms. It closed 2023, I think. So yeah, last year, I mean, it's been struggling for several years. I think it got took over in 2020. They wanted to keep it going as a pub, couldn't do it. And then it became a restaurant, and I think it is still a Mediterranean restaurant. I'd love to think it's gone back to the Exeter Arms, but I don't think it has. I think 1765 it was built. Well, it looks like it is the Exeter Arms once more. That's good news. I might be wrong because that is probably just an old sign. I don't know what it is. I think it's more a restaurant than a pub. But aren't they all nowadays? As I say, built in 1765. Some old 18th century bay windows at the front there as well. Camino restaurant. Yeah, I think it's more of a Mediterranean restaurant. It does say on there than it is. It's certainly not the old Exeter Arms that many people would remember, which is a shame. But it survives. On the right hand side of the picture you can just make out what is the stump of an old windmill, and that is old Dexter's mill, built in 1760, closed in 1900. I think it was bought just after closure, and I think the guy who bought it ripped it down with an old traction engine. Well, he didn't rip it all down, we took the sails off and the top off. From what I read somewhere, the wooden sails were sold to the village undertaker and wheelwright and ended up being used to make old wagons. I don't know who Dexter was. I mean, the Dexters were a farming family in Easton, so it's going to be coming from the farmer Dexter family. They're just all over Easton in the sort of late 1800s, so that's where the name came from. Which Dexter, I don't know. Whether it's just a family thing, I don't know. I mean, the last guy here, the last miller on the 1891 census was Edwin Spademan, and he was a guy who tried to sell it, put it out to let, couldn't succeed, and ended up selling them. And he had a tough end to life. He ended up dying in the Stamford workhouse, penniless, in 1911 or around that time. But I want to see if I can get in and see anything. Might prove very, very difficult to get through this lot. There used to be a dwelling. It's a 3.5 acre site. We've just walked across most of it between the road and the mill. But in here was the house, the dwelling, quite a big one that went with the mill. It won't be there anymore, but it might see the foundations. But Doesn't look like we'll get in. Got to persevere. Right, while I forage around in here looking for remains of an old house, I put up a couple of items. They're a bit sketchy. One is a pencil sketch really of the landscape around here. You can see to the left of the mill there is a house. That's where we are now, albeit it's covered in trees now, but we're more or less on that spot. And the other one is a map which also shows around here there was a house. The little building on the other side was a bakery. So we should find some foundations if we keep persevering and getting ripped to bits. We're starting to get through towards the stump. Not quite there yet. We're through. Oh. There you go. Old Dexter's mill. Seen no life since 1900. If I could show you what's inside, I can't see it, but you might be able to. I think there's a door over there. Don't know if this is the foundations of the bakehouse that was next door. Might not be, could be. Don't think I'll go down there, I'll never get up again. Actually, there's another door over there. I think I might go around and try and find that. There you go. We are in. We are in Dexter's mill. It's quite big when you get inside. Very big. Very impressive. I can't make any sense of it in this state of ruin. I'm clambering around inside the woodland area looking for any sort of foundations from the house that was next door to the mill. There's nothing here. Lots of mounds, lots of occasional bits of stonework and bricks, but I would imagine it was stripped and made use of in the village somewhere. So no, nothing to see really. Yeah, bits of debris. I'm sure they could all tell a story if they could speak. Lots of stonework. If the ivy wasn't here, you might have some idea of what's underneath. Looks like there's probably walls, so there are bits of the old house here, but just buried alive. I've got in my hand a March 1890 Stamford Mercury cutting, 1890, when young Edwin was trying to sell the mill, and it states, I quote, 2 stones, pretty standard for a mill, 2 stones, gear for a steam engine. Interesting. Dwelling house with dairy, a bakehouse with a new oven, stables, a cart shed, piggeries, a garden, 3.5 acres fronting the highway. The mill's just to our left now, and that's the highway. So basically all this land in front of us and to the left was all part of the land on which the mill stood. Back on the noisy Stamford Road, heading back down on the opposite side to the Exeter Arms, and talking of which, on the left, that used to be a pub. There used to be about 8 or 9 pubs in Easton at one stage. Excuse the cars again. This was the Oak Public House, been shut a long time. Very distinctly a pub. Could open it again today and it would be recognisable as a public house for sure. Second of 3 pubs along this road, side by side in effect. The Crown, this was number 12, for sale. The Crown Public House, as was. Sorry again for the noise. Right, coming up to another noisy but short-lived pub, which was known as the Fox, possibly the Fox and Hounds. I'm not quite sure which one it was, because it's listed differently on 2 different documents. Dates to 1834. Not sure it was open for too long. That's it, Rock House, formerly the Fox or the Fox and Hounds. Right, let's get out of the noise now, hopefully, and onto High Street and into Easton Village, which should be a bit quieter, he said, hopefully. That's better. Just as you enter the village here, you bump into the Spring Close Pocket Park with quite an informative board here, and a war memorial to the first Polish Independent Parachute Brigade, who were based here for a period of time during the Second World War. I think they did a lot of training here before being dispatched elsewhere. Ended up in the Battle of Arnhem, which was a tough one. A lot of lives were lost. And I've always had an affiliation with Easton on the Hill. And the villagers have always made sure that there is a memorial here. This is a replacement for the original. The original was where the actual paratroopers were based, but that site's now a private site, so they've moved this into a more public location. And they're always well remembered here, and rightly so. Lots of old 1700s or thereabouts converted barns, of which this is one, with a sort of cart entrance on the right. Some wonderful triangular ventilation holes on the side. That one's not actually been converted yet, but most of them have been. Number 58, the one with a light on the left, Pilgrim Cottage. That one dates back to the late 1700s. Very nice. Got Bit of a ghost door on the left there, if you can just pick it out. It used to be a shop. Another ghost door on the right. 1700s. House and shop. I'm not sure which bit was the house or which bit was the shop. Another old village pub coming up. Carpenter's Arms. Long gone. I think just about every house up here is old. I know something about some, but very little about others. But yeah, it's just a fantastic collection of old buildings. They should do a period drama soap opera up here. They wouldn't need to change too much. That tall building is a schoolmaster's house, which means we're in close proximity to an old school, which we are just around the corner. But that was the actual schoolmaster's house. Dates back to about the 1860s, so not that old compared with a lot of Easton. But the school's just around the corner. Yeah, so there's the schoolmaster's house on the left, and that's the old school, which I think is the village hall now. Yeah, I think it is the village hall, but unmistakably used to be a school. Dates to 1867. Closed in 1975, at which point it was an infant school. You have buildings like the one opposite us now, which has obviously got age to it. Hundreds of years of age, but it's not a listed building. What makes some listed and others not, I really don't know. But if they're not, then there's no detail anywhere about what they are. So you just have to enjoy what is an old building, really. Buildings on the left there with the sort of high dormer windows, they date back to 1600s, which is a long, long time. Wonderful side of that building. Wonderful. Village War Memorial. Built in the I think it was built in 1920, paid for by the villagers, as was usually the case. The brave personnel from the village that lost their lives, may they rest in peace. Just noticed the house to the right. (1607). That's a ridiculous age. 1607, over 400 years old. Carry on up High Street. It's another old pub, the Royal Princess, 1649. Long since closed, and on the right, still open, is the Bluebell pub. Somewhere up here on the left is a blacksmith, one of several in the village. Can't tell you when it was a blacksmith. The building dates to the 1600s, and which bit of it was the forge I don't really know, but I think it's the middle section, the recessed section there. It's marked on old maps as a blacksmith. That rather large building, which is now probably, I think it is still one property. It used to be a farmhouse. Again, dates back to the 1600s, Yew Tree Farmhouse. It's a big one. West Street is one of those roads that just gets more narrow the further you go. But a couple of really nice old buildings further down, which we shall see. A couple of mystery buildings on the way. I wish I could tell you more about these. There's just some serious age. It's all sort of 1600s, 1700s. The building on the left is marked as the old bakery, which I'm sure it was. But I can tell you a little more about it. As to which part of it was the bakery, I don't know. It could have been any of those buildings. A lot of age down there. Just coming up to the lane, which we will be going down, but I'll come back to it once I've been down West Street. I think that's a pub actually. The lower building on the right there, the White Horse, is a pub, but we'll have a look when we come back. Old pubs everywhere. Seems to be the buildings with these sort of high, what I call dormer windows at the top, like the one ahead. It seems to be those that are the oldest properties in the village. They're more the 1600s than the 1700s buildings. Bit of a vague statement, that one, but probably was built a few years ago. The style certainly is old. Now this is one of those stunning buildings, the tall one just coming up on the right. This is the priest's house, as you can see from the sign on the left. It's a National Trust property, and believe it or not, wait for it, dates back to 1495. Seriously, 1495. I mean, okay, it's been modernised a few times since, but it was here in 1495, which is staggering. The most famous building in the village. I mean, look at that. I mean, that is old. That is old. The story behind it all is that back in the early 1400s, the vicar of the church, which is just across the field, a chap called Thomas Stokes, he wanted some assurances after he passed away that he would get through purgatory, which was a big thing back then, pretty quick. Purgatory was that sort of intermediate stage between passing away and getting into heaven. It was the period in which your sins were cleansed, the cleansing of the soul, getting you ready for heaven. And the theory was back then that the more people that said prayers for you after you died, the faster you would get through purgatory, the faster you would therefore get into heaven. He left it in his will, enough money to build this place and to employ the services of a priest to say prayers for him, probably several times a day for God knows how long, in the hope that it would get him through purgatory faster. We saw something similar at Cotterstock, in the Cotterstock village, but this is cuter. I hope it worked for him. The whole concept of purgatory died out with King Henry VIII. He wasn't having any nonsense that glorified the church, and I'm surprised he didn't level the place, or his henchmen didn't level the place, but it kind of stopped after the mid-1500s. That's what it was about. I believe you can actually get in, and there's a bit of a museum inside, which I'd be interested in seeing. So if I can find a key holder somewhere, I might be able to get in here. Not promising anything. I will try my best. Right. The right key first. Ooh. Welcome to the priest house. After it stopped being a priest's house in the mid-1500s, it really went into just general storage use, agricultural storage use, as you can imagine. All sorts of things would have been dumped in here. They did store livestock in here at one point. One assumes downstairs and not up the steep steps. But it's a school. It became a school at one point. I think in the early days of schooling, before there was such a thing as state schooling, I mean, any sort of benefactor, anyone with a bit of money and a goodwill about themselves would set up a school, sometimes almost in a front room. But this building, probably upstairs and downstairs, was used as a school. It would be fantastic to see a picture of that, but we are talking, we're talking 200 years plus ago. But yeah, it was a school at one point, and then probably just went into generally being left to deteriorate. So thankfully the National Trust stepped in to look after what is a very, very old building and worthy of looking after. I mean, you're talking nearly 600 years old, which is pretty astonishing. Yeah, fascinating place. I won't film it all and ruin the experience if you're coming along to Easton Village for a Sunday stroll. If you look on the side wall of the priest house, there's a notice on there saying who the key holders are. I think it's about 4 or 5 properties within the village. You go and knock on the door and ask if you can have the priest house key or borrow it. Then they'll help you out as long as you take it back afterwards. And there's one just up the hill from the priest house itself, which is where I went, so you don't need to walk far. But well worth the trip. Well worth the trip. Right. Time to fall down the stairs.